Adopt. All in favor?
Aye.
So passes. Good. So the discussion and review of the charter committee report. I will hand it over to our legal beagle, Mr. Schrader.
Thank you, sir. Before each of you is a memorandum dated September 9th, 2021, which was quickly presented to the council at that time in order to describe what we're going to do this evening. And I will give just a brief background for the benefit of those who may later listen to the recording of this proceeding. The current town charter, section 7.103, requires that the charter be reviewed every 10th year to see if there is some reason to make changes in the charter. As you all know, from time to time we do find reasons to make charter changes, and rather than wait 10 years or up to 10 years to have those take place, we go ahead and present it to the General Assembly and get them taken care of in a timely manner. The persons who are appointed to the committee to review the charter include former Mayor Karen, Councilman Malley, Finance Director Parks, Town Clerk Schwartz.
Dennis, I'm sorry, I need to hold up here. The interpreter is not interpreting, so I don't know what the problem is.
Okay.
That's a very small iPad. Oh, okay, now I got it. Okay, I didn't realize that. They're transitioning back and forth, but I didn't get the transition. Okay, thank you, sorry.
Good to go?
Maybe go a little slower too.
Mr. White, if I get to speaking too quickly, you have Mr. Malley slap me around a little.
Okay.
And yeah, okay, thank you. The committee was sent a complete copy of the charter and asked to review the charter and to get back to me with anything that they thought was a problem that should be addressed by the committee as a whole. And once I received those, I consolidated all of those comments into a document that was 6 pages long and made reference to the questions that were asked by each of the persons who responded. The first live meeting we had was on March 18th. After we had that live meeting, we finished up the second half of our review on June 16th. My associate Michelle Bounds and I put together a report, circulated it, and what you were looking at tonight is what came out of that review process. I would like to point out that some of the matters that were brought up were not matters necessarily that required charter review or charter changes. For instance, when the municipal election law was changed, it was adopted by, excuse me, 3/4 of the members of each house of the General Assembly, and within its content, it says that anything that is inconsistent in a town election law or in a town charter that is inconsistent with the new state law is repealed. So any questions that we had about how to handle election matters had already been repealed. And so some of the information got to the committee that solved a lot of the problems that we discussed. However, there still remains 6 items left to be brought to your attention, and the memo that you have in front of you gives you a brief description of what the issue is and what our recommendation is in terms of things that need to be done. The first one I'm going to take up is one I believe that originated with Finance Director Parks, and that is that there is currently no chief financial officer for the town of Ocean View, even though the charter requires one. We have a finance director, which is Dawn Parks, and she has a compensation set by the council. There are, in the current charter, requirements that he or she is to be appointed by the council, and that he or she is to serve at the pleasure of the council, and the council will determine compensation. This leaves us with 3 possible options. One, to continue the current process as it currently exists, which would be without a chief financial officer, but with a finance director. The second choice would be to eliminate the finance director position and fill the position of chief financial officer and determine compensation by the council. Or the third one would be to have the chief financial officer appointed by the town manager, subject to council approval and compensated as determined by the council, and further authorizing the manager to appoint an acting CFO in the event of a vacancy until a permanent chief financial officer is confirmed.
May I speak before we move on?
Sure.
Now?
Yes.
Okay. So, I had sent you an email in or about September, I believe it was. Finance director is a more common local government term. And for what it's worth, that's what I'd like to see us continue. So I would suggest that 3, remove the item 3 here option. Say have the finance director appointed by the town manager. And then I'd also like consideration about subject to council approval. This is not typically done for finance director positions when you have a town manager. I would suggest that there are opportunities for conflict if town councils are involved with personnel. If you have an issue with who is selected for the finance position, then the town council deals with the town manager. That's the way that I'd like to see it be written.
The interpreter's having a very hard time hearing you, and she's too close to me, and I cannot see her hands while she's interpreting. So I don't know how you solve that problem.
Is that what's picking me up?
No, it's on the desk.
Okay, I can speak much louder.
Okay.
Is that any better?
That better?
Test? Can you hear me better?
Yeah, apparently. Yeah.
Yes, okay, so, I'll go backwards because I don't know where we were, but, it would be my preference that we would maintain the finance director title because finance director is a more common, title for, the person that does everything that Dawn does in local government. And then it would also be my recommendation to have that position not be subject to council approval. Again, common for local government, for everybody. Typically, the only other position that might be subject to council approval or appointment would be the chief of police.
And I want to make sure I got that correct, Carol. You want town manager appointment of a finance director not subject to council approval or subject to council approval?
I would recommend getting rid of the subject to council approval. And I'll answer any questions about that. It's,
okay,
I
have a comment though.
yeah,
Well, I got a comment also.
Okay.
I think we could do the same thing that you're talking about by just saying, continue the current process as it currently exists.
if it's okay to have a charter provision that says we will have a chief financial officer, but we don't.
Well,
But it also says that the council can appoint the town manager as the chief financial officer. Then it relates to the next section that tells you the duties of the chief financial officer, which you then are giving to me as the finance director.
And I'm going to object to both of those. I absolutely firmly believe that you never have the chief administrative officer of any community or town and the finance director in one position, nor do you have the chief administrative officer and the finance director appointed by the chief administrative officer, because you do not have the necessary independence and separation to protect the public treasury. Period.
Can you repeat the second thing that you just, the last thing you just said from the beginning?
Yes, I object to both.
No, not
And
the second
reason I
statement.
object to both is that if you have the town manager appoint a finance director, or if you have, what was the other one you wanted? Or have the town manager become the chief financial officer, you have no independence as far as protecting the public treasury is concerned.
Okay.
And I'm not accusing either one of these nice ladies of anything, but you invite.
I don't recommend that, the town manager be titled, the chief financial officer. I recommend that the finance director be appointed by the town manager.
Okay, can I ask, we haven't had a chief financial officer, in spite of the fact that Charter calls for one, for more than 10 years. Why all of a sudden do we need to have one?
I'm not saying that we do need to have one, I'm just saying these were the conversations that we had at the time that the committee met.
So we could stay with what we have already and not make any change.
You can maintain the status quo if you chose to do so.
It seems like that has the least disruption by staying the course.
You want to comment on it? Really want.
But we're not, but we haven't been following that.
Well,
What we,
why do we
That's why
have
it got brought up.
I
Yeah,
mean,
that's
It's
why it
because
got
we're not
brought up.
doing what the code says.
Why do we have to follow it? If we haven't been following, why do we have to now?
I don't know why.
well, we're
It said-
supposed to follow the charter.
but the charter provides that there may be a chief financial officer. It's permissive, not mandatory.
Have we ever had one?
Yes, but not for long.
Did you have at the time a finance manager at the same time?
We had
A
a
finance
person-
director?
We had a person who would rather be a finance director than a chief financial officer because the terms of his employment were better. And I think it had a lot to do with the fact that that person's concerns were about removal from office because of the people that he was then serving for on the town council
The,
during the dark days.
the personnel is supposed to sit under the responsibility of the town manager. That's what the town manager accepts. The hiring of their staff to accomplish the goals of the town should be something that they have control over. If you have a problem with what the decisions of the town manager, then the council deals with the town manager.
See, the fact that it says that we may have a chief financial officer doesn't mean we have to have a chief financial officer.
No.
And I think getting this resolved to the point where you would have to hire a new person to be the chief financial officer is a financial burden.
Well, we wouldn't have, I mean, if we change it, we wouldn't have to do it.
I think we have a good candidate. If she wanted it.
Dawn, can I hear your opinion?
I brought it up because I didn't feel the town was following what the charter says. Based on when you leave section 103, you go to section 104, which tells you all the duties of the chief financial officer, which is every job that I
I'm
do.
sorry, you took it, I cannot hear you from there.
Okay.
I don't think that works.
I lost my memory.
Do these work? Do these work?
No.
Only that works?
That's just for the interpreter.
Section 103 is followed by section 104, which are the duties of the chief financial officer. The duties of the chief financial officer are what I do. It can stay as it is. I still do the job. I just brought it up because it didn't seem like we were following what the charter said.
So your solution would be to change the title to the CFO?
No, not necessarily. Just my opinion would be to remove section
2.104 from the charter, but that would be a big wipeout to move everything up. Or to add to section 2104, duties to be appointed by the town manager to whoever.
So at some point in time, because you don't follow the charter on something like this, can this come back to create an issue?
Not necessarily.
Unless somebody was to bring it up?
I don't know.
We've been through annual audits ever since I've been here. And the question has never been raised until Don raised it. But, you know, the duties that are required by 2.104 are currently fulfilled by the finance director, except that, as Carol points out from time to time, part of preparing the annual budget also is done by the town manager, and I think that's in your agreement.
That's in my contract.
In your employment agreement. It's not that the work goes wanting, the question is that 2.103 says there may be a chief financial officer, and the duties of 2.104 have been shared a little bit between the two, the manager and the finance director. Do we want to go back and clean this up? Do you want to maintain the status quo?
I can also share one more thing, and then we can go on or vote or whatever. There is a town in the state, a city in the state, where the finance director does not report to the town manager. This causes a lot of concerns. It has caused issues for that city, many issues. There is the opportunity for there to be a division. It's not ideal by any means. I think we could take 3 on page 2 of 4 from the memorandum and change chief financial officer to finance director. If you wish to keep in subject to council approval, keep it in. And then later in that sentence, change chief financial officer to finance director. I think that can, get us where we're following what, what our charter says, which is always a good thing.
Other than the nomenclature, have we accomplished anything?
No.
No, but it was brought up as we weren't following it, so if we're going to fix it, that's my 2 cents, you've heard it, and that's all I got.
And that's why we brought it to you guys.
Yeah, this is all semantics. I don't see the reason to do this. Just because it may be appointed doesn't mean that it has to be appointed. There is no change to anybody's position or duties as a result of this change. It just makes it look as if we're following the charter. But the charter doesn't tell us we have to do it. So I think we're spending a lot of time.
It doesn't, Dennis?
No, the language says there may be a chief financial officer appointed by the council.
Well, I'm fine with leaving things as it is. The only other thing I will say, even though I know I said I finished, is you are the council now, but this town and its operations could be disturbed by a future council choosing to enact some of these language.
Well,
Think about, and I'm not, look, I'm talking about the future, so I'm not pointing it out to anybody, but somebody knows somebody, they want them to be hired for a position. That's why mayor and councils are not involved in the daily personnel duties
There have been a lot of lessons learned by the town council, the town managers, and the financial or chief financial officers of this town over years. The current charter you're looking at was adopted in 2010. There was a predecessor that had some of the same language in it from around 2000. And in that time frame, there's always been the cyclical change of the town council where there's a 2-term limit and everybody alternates terms so that we never have somebody come in here and become the mayor for life like some of the towns that we have in Sussex County, or a council member for life as we have in some of the towns in this county, and probably statewide too. The point that I would make is that if we look at the history of this town in order to predict its future, the history is that we've been very stable in the administration of the town, notwithstanding these rotational changes in the town council. And we're fortunate, even though I'm not a resident of this town, but I will include me in the we part of this. We are fortunate because in the last couple of years we have managed to assemble a good team of people that work well together. And you guys are going to come and go, but Carol and Dawn, and someday maybe me, will move along. But what we have now sort of works.
So currently, the finance officer is under the town manager's supervision. Is that correct?
That's how we operate, yes.
Yeah.
And the town council doesn't appoint, it only approves a replacement based on your recommendation. Is that correct?
I don't think the approval has taken place. I
Are you
think,
talking about the CFO?
No.
Or the finance director?
Finance
but
director.
we don't have a
Finance
CSO.
director is hired by the town manager. It has nothing to do with council.
I'm just affirming.
I mean, to our knowledge, Dawn was hired by, we know that, by Diane, the former, I can't speak to prior to that. I don't know if you can, I can.
I don't think Miss Peck was here that long, that I recall. And before that, it was Lee Brubaker, who was here for a significant amount of time.
The finance directors have been hired by the town manager and report to the town manager as they should. The salary is determined and approved by the budget.
Right. So if suddenly you get a 0 salary, Dawn, you would be getting the message, right?
Well, with it as it stands, even though I'm the finance director, by this, council could appoint someone as a CFO
They could.
above me.
And they would also have to approve the funding for that.
Yes.
Dennis, if you think we're not at risk as council member, by changing anything or not changing anything and keep moving, charging along, I think we've all discussed the possible things that could occur. The town council and the staff at the time, if it does, will have to deal with it if we keep this.
It's not my decision and I don't have a vote, but quite frankly, I think the status quo is pretty attractive.
If he thinks it's okay to do it, then I guess we can keep it.
So we'll just eliminate the title of CFO?
No?
No,
No,
we don't have a CFO.
I know, but it's in the language
We'll
of...
keep it in the charter.
I know, but it's in the language of the charter.
Again, the charter doesn't require that you appoint a CFO. It says that you may appoint a CFO.
You will not have a CFO. The town will continue to not have one.
Correct.
But
Yes.
the duties of the CFO will be performed by Dawn.
By myself.
I mean, to me, it's almost like a rose by any other name smells like a rose. And I think we should, you know,
One comment. Things aren't broken, right? Things are running very, very smooth. And basically, all we're doing is to try to comply with this 10-year review of the charter. Whether we change anything or not, my opinion is things have been running smooth. Several of us have been here when they weren't running all that smooth. And I know Dennis knows that things were really bad at one time. But things right now are running smooth. And, it's just, I think we're trying to comply with this review with the charter, and that's it. Whether we change anything or not. There's a couple that are no-brainers in here, but this one is like, if it isn't broken, don't try to fix it.
So,
That's just my comment.
okay, thank you. So, do we need to vote on a recommendation we're giving you?
I think we should at least take a straw poll, even though we have not indicated in the,
Okay.
if I'm directed by the current council to take no further action on that section, then I can take that as a maintain the status
That's
quo.
number one.
Yes, on number one.
All right, are we all in favor of staying with option one?
I vote to stay with one.
Bruce, are you comfortable with staying option one?
Yeah.
Frank?
I'm also in favor of just eliminating the name, the position of CFO and leaving financial director and under the direct supervision of the town manager. That's how I feel. So it's one with modifications.
Well, I think if we did that, they would have to, the committee has to go back and relook at this section 2.103, right? I mean, can we tell you to get rid of that section and what implications it has?
If we were to remove, in order to get 2.103 removed, which is what I think Mr. Torzik is suggesting, we would have to draft a charter amendment to be adopted by the General Assembly. Sometime during the next, sometime before June 30, 2022.
What's the likelihood of the General Assembly accepting that? Because of the implications it might have.
We've had remarkably good success with our legislation before the General Assembly. I would imagine it's close to 100%.
Usually it's almost like a rubber stamp right there.
Especially if it's clarifying
Yeah.
in nature.
I mean, I look at the situation here, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I mean, we have a great team here, and I don't want to interrupt that functionality.
Okay, Don?
I'm good with as it currently exists.
Okay. Do we want to amend that by suggesting that Dennis draft something that goes to the legislature to remove section 2.103? Anybody besides Frank?
If you remove 2.103, you would remove 2.104 as well.
Right.
Plus, there's the term chief financial officer is throughout the charter.
Okay.
Would it be, Dennis, would it be at least more clarifying to say every place that chief financial officer exists is replaced with finance director?
But if you do
No.
that, all you've done is change the title
You
and
just
the name of
changed
the
the
person.
title.
And you haven't changed the process, because it would then be, the
The
finance
finance.
director would be appointed by the council and report to the town manager.
It would be appointed by the council, yes, and report it to the manager.
But you've already
But
said that
sort
it
of
doesn't, we don't have to
pleasure.
change anything and we can do what we're doing.
I'm
I
not
think to
sure.
clarify, I think what Carol is saying is we keep option one, and then every place else that chief financial officer is mentioned in the charter, you change it to to the finance director. Is that what you meant?
Yeah, anything that.
So 2.104 will be changed, well, really,
It still requires the charter change and it needs to go to the General Assembly. And if we're gonna go to that effort, let's get it right. But
So 106 to chief financial officer
Right.
at the bottom.
again, if
106.
Dennis, if you think that we're not,
I don't think we have a problem. I think that we have stumbled into a bit of a whirlwind that need not be a problem. It works. You've got your scope of work that's been defined for you. Carol has hers. Everybody is working well. And if we go back and start changing all of this, every time the word finance director appears in the charter when it's substituted for the chief financial officer, could create more problems than you've actually solved.
Okay, so I think we've had complete agreement on leaving it alone. And I think, given your description of what would happen if we were to go through the whole charter and change chief financial officer chief to finance director, has more potential problems. So I think we'll just stick with option one.
Fair enough. Moving to the next one, which is item 2, Charter Section 2.1064. I'd like to point out to you that first of all, I think the charter section number is mistyped or misspoken in the actual printed charter, but that is after 2.105 is section 2.1064, and it would lead you to believe there are about 59 sections somewhere that have been lost. And in any event, there's a requirement that there be a bond set by ordinance, and as Dawn has pointed out, and I don't think there's going to be much debate about this, there needs to be an ordinance establishing a bond for people that touch money in the town of Ocean View, and that would be the mayor at $25,000, the mayor pro tem at $25,000, the town manager at $25,000, and the finance director at $100,000. And I think the recommended action is adopt an ordinance requiring that. So if the 5 members of the council say do it, we will get an ordinance out. And we make that read chief financial officer or finance director.
Yes, I was going to say, because it says the chief financial officer shall have a bond, not the finance director.
There's some irony in that.
Yeah.
And I think the
I
recommendation has to add the town manager's left.
Yeah,
out.
this is the version that doesn't have town manager on it.
Yeah. Just right here, I mean, when you describe it, it's not town manager up here in the list, but it's not down here.
It's not down the bottom.
The version that was sent out doesn't have it down.
You can see this thing?
Dawn's
One for the
telling us that
mayor,
the version that
town
went out,
manager, and finance
we don't
director.
have that copy.
It's the one that was used.
I don't know, this is the one that we were
This is
given
what
this
we got.
week. It's just that town manager's missing from that sentence.
Okay, well, let's say this. Town manager will be added.
Gotcha.
I don't know that, and I'll have to look, we were gonna look at the water. We no longer have USDA bonds, so I don't know that I have to have a $100,000 bond anymore. I think it could be reduced, but we have to, before we do the ordinance,
Okay.
look to see. I've never seen a finance director have to have a $100,000 bond. That puts a lot on someone's head.
Nobody uses cash anymore either.
Okay, so do we have agreement on the recommendation for number 2? Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Number 3, this one's real easy, folks. I think, Carol, have you received the Department of Commerce sent you the census data yet?
Not yet.
Somewhere out there, we have a duty to reevaluate and reestablish the boundaries of the council districts. And we have to do it as soon as practicable. If you're familiar with the Civil War, that's the thing that got Robert E. Lee in trouble at Culp's Hill. And that means that once the data gets here, we've got to get it done. But I don't see it happening before the next general election for 2 reasons. One of them is that Carol and Lon are going to be busy as Bonnie's doing the budget between now and, 1st of April. And the election falls right on the heels of the budget. So unless somebody can tell us that there's any better way to do it quicker, it won't be until, once the data gets here, we can pick up the ball and run with it. So that the election for 2023 is likely the first election that will be in the new districts. And that doesn't require anything other than that was a reminder. Number 4, I believe this also came from Carol, and it dealt with lapse of unexpended appropriations. And the concern arises from projects with multi-year funding that are not completed within a fiscal year. The finance director seeks clarity that the funds are encumbered until the proposed project is completed, terminated, or abandoned. And the same will also be true for section 3.103. And if that meets with your approval, Dawn, I'll get busy and write another ordinance, right?
I believe that we decided when we talked that this could be added to our annual budget ordinance.
Yes.
So it's not something we need now, it'll be part of the annual budget ordinance.
Right. When funds are designated.
Yes.
Right. And everybody, I assume, is in agreement with that.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's regular, customary,
Yeah.
what should be done.
Number 5, as you're following along, provides that the town council may by ordinance assign any or all of its power under this section to a board of assessment, which shall be chosen in such fashion, serve for such term, and have such duties as the town council may ordain as luck would have it. We don't have such an ordinance, and so we would propose to you that we prepare such an ordinance and establish 3-year terms with 2 term limits for each board member.
Sounds consistent.
Any controversy with that?
No.
Oh. Damn, Mr. Rivington, am I talking too fast?
No. Keep on. You're doing a good job.
Let's slow this one down, Carol. Can we make it get past 7? The last one on the list is the Charter 5.101 provides that the personnel system describing the personnel system states, the town council shall establish a personnel system relating to all appointments and promotions of town officers and employees and their compensation, pension, and such other benefits as the council may deem necessary and best. The manager shall be responsible for administering the personnel system of the town, of which you shall prepare such rules and regulations as are necessary to comply with the charter. Appeal procedures for personnel decisions of the town manager may be established by the town council. The policy was adopted in 2016, it was adopted in 2004 by ordinance number 163, which was later repealed in 2016 by ordinance number 232. We now have a policy that is not an ordinance, but we don't have anything that conforms to the charter requirement that there be an appeal from describing or setting appeal procedures from decisions of the town manager.
Do we know why it was repealed?
Why it was repealed? The reason we got rid of the ordinance and went to the personnel manual is that there was so much movement going on with, and correct me if I'm wrong, Donna, but there was movement with health insurance, comp time, there was movement with pension contributions, and it seemed like every time we turned around, somebody had to introduce a new ordinance, come back in, and 60 days later, the action can actually take place when, in fact, the more efficient way to do it was to have the personnel manual prepared, and I know that my office spent a significant amount of time going over that with Diane Vogel. We got it all together, and then the point was that if something came up that nobody thought of that should have been addressed, then it was a simple matter for the town manager to make that a proposed change to the personnel manager, and you come back to the town council and say, hi, I'm the town manager, we're going to change section 123.4.9 to read as follows, and everybody would go along with it and be done.
But by resolution.
By resolution, and that way it cuts about 60 days out of the decision-making process. The problem is that in doing that, and as Carol knows from having to work with it probably within the first few days of her tenure as town manager in terms of termination and whatnot, there's a lot of stuff in there that that took place, and it's a fairly lengthy personnel manual. It just got missed.
Okay, so,
And having an appeal procedure is regular and customary, should be something people have the option for.
And that would be similar to the city, you know, just to go backwards for a moment to fill in some backwards. I'm not trying to make this go to 7 o'clock, Carol. But the point of the story is that as far as police personnel are concerned, there is a whole different set of procedures, because there is a law enforcement bill of rights that are not covered by this personnel manual, and they have separate procedures for discipline and termination that are not available to what I'm going to call the civil side of the town administration. So a simple process needs to be described, given to Carol for presentation for adoption by resolution. The only caveat that I want to give you, and this has not been something that's been an issue in this town, but in the other 3 or 4 towns that I've represented in my past, is that if you get a disgruntled employee who doesn't like what a town manager does, the first thing they do is run off to the town council and start contaminating the appeal. And if we get to that point, whether it's me or some other town solicitor, you're going to hear us barking like dogs. Don't talk to the unhappy employee, because if you do, then you're not going to be able to hear the appeal.
It would also be in violation of my agreement.
Right. So the idea is that Carol, what Carol's got to do, if there's for some reason to be an appeal, don't get into the game of trying to talk to the employee unhappy. So, but that's not going to be incorporated in the process. That will go as part of the resolution. And I think Carol and I agree on that, right?
okay, so any changes to the rules and regulations doesn't require us to amend the charter.
Nope.
It's all just part of personnel policy.
Personnel manual, which
Yeah.
in 2020, last year, we overhauled a whole bunch of things.
19.
19.
19. It's right before the quarantine, wasn't it?
Oh, it was 20 then.
Yeah. Maybe.
I think it was, I don't know.
It was February 14th.
We did a lot of things in the quarantine that we don't remember.
It was, I mean, we spent a lot of time, all the staff participated.
Yeah.
And that also got to do with the personnel people up in my office.
All right, so do we have an agreement on this change as well? Frank?
Yeah.
Tom?
Yes.
Yeah. Do we have an agreement on this particular one as well? Okay. Good. Any other discussion related to these charter changes?
I would add this, and we did not bring it to the council for consideration, but I know that Carol, Dawn, and from time to time I look at the process by which the budget is adopted, and it's like a bowl of spaghetti in terms of trying to figure out what happens on what date and for what reason. We've been fortunate because we do have a program that allows for all of the various data to either be incorporated into it or revised as required based upon the current economic status. And I know that when we talked about it, Carol and I kind of had an epiphany. We thought we understood it there for a little while, why things were in the charter the way they are, but I'm not so sure, you know. I think the answer is that while we go through the charter provisions for revising the budget for the next fiscal year, we all keep notes on what we think is the right thing to do about the timing and sequencing of various things. For instance, there's a public hearing right before there's another public hearing. 2 on the same night, but it's required by the charter and it seems redundant if not unnecessary. So there's some things we need to take a look at in that regard. And I think when we played around with this, Carol and I thought we were going to come up with something and then we kind of backed out of it because I remember, but we thought we understood it.
Dawn and you.
Donna knows.
Just for the record.
Yeah, because you're still confused? Don't be, because you're there. But we did discuss that. Maybe we'll give that to the CFO.
No questions? Okay. Seeing there are no questions, I then ask for excuse me, a motion to adjourn.
We have a
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So, okay, thank you very much.